How do we get to a place where women, especially middle-aged white women, will, much like the black population, vote against their best interests? Well, my generation, the sight of two men kissing was the kind of stuff that would make me nauseous to vomit. But by smuggling it into Netflix and anything that Disney owns and all over television and movies and so on, you gradually start to get used to it. That's part of the goal, is that you become desensitized to it and you begin to accept it as normal. The left wanted to reduce global population and they wanted to attack the family. And they did. How often have you heard, you need to wait till you finish your degree? You should wait till you get established in your job. You should wait until you have a house. How did God design women in terms of their most fertile years? It's in their 20s. Those are the most fertile childbearing years. And the left's message was, it's too soon. Welcome to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton. We've all seen the data. In almost every battleground state where Democrats won or are projected to win in the midterms, it's liberal white women who pull the Democrat candidate across the line. It's led to some conservatives to joke that maybe we should repeal the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment, if you don't remember your civics class, is that amendment which gave women the right to vote, women's suffrage. It's led others to say the same thing, only they're not joking. They're saying liberal white women, that they're the problem in America when it comes to elections and a great deal more. And of course, we generally collectively refer to them as Karens. How did we get here? How did we get to a place where women are voting against what are really their best and most useful purpose and where they would find genuine fulfillment, to where they vote against all of it? Now, I've been looking for good examples to present to you of how the steady drip of propaganda, particularly when it's over the course of years or in this case, over the course of decades, and when it is concentrated on a specific topic, how very effective it actually is in changing minds, and usually for evil. And I hear people say all the time, legacy media or traditional media or mainstream media, if you might want to call it that, legacy media is dead, people will say. And of course, they're referring to long-term, outlets like the major networks, CNN and BBC and the New York Times and on, that they're dead. They have to be propped up with taxpayer dollars largely, which is true. We discovered with USAID, but only they aren't dead. Fewer people are paying attention to them. More people are wiser to them, but they still serve a very important function, and they are still influencing voters. They serve a very important function for the left, and the left knows this. This is why they were redirecting funds, hundreds of millions of dollars from USAID, and why they wanted no oversight on USAID, and they were redirecting it back into media outlets from Christianity Today, which serves an evil purpose by and large these days, all the way over to NPR, and even giving U.S. taxpayer dollars to BBC. Why would they do that if legacy media is dead? It's because they know it isn't. They know that it still influences the thinking of millions of people. So I come back to my original question. How do we get to a place where women, especially middle-aged white women, will, much like the black population, vote against their best interests? Well, it's happened through an unrelenting war against women, and by extension, the real target, a war against children. Have you noticed how, if you're my age, I'm in my 50s, I'm a Gen Xer, graduated high school in the mid 80s. Have you noticed how anti-child our society has become over the course of my lifetime? But you could even say over the course of maybe the last 20 years. Have you noticed the change? We used to be a very pro-child society, and that, of course, is largely due to the influence of the Christian faith, which puts a lot of emphasis on care for the vulnerable in society, care for the elderly, for the sick, and children, because any healthy society recognizes the children are the future. And am I quoting? Is that Michael Jackson? Is that "We are the world, we are the children, we are the ones to make better"? I think it is. I think that lyric is in there. But there you go. Children are our future, and yet, working against our own best interests, we as a society, particularly the Western world, but it's been global, have made war on children. And in order to really effectively make war on children, you really have to go after those who bear children. And in spite of the things that you may have heard in recent years, or perhaps they've influenced you into believing that men can get pregnant, I have to relate to you a biological fact. 0 men in the entire history of the world have ever given birth to children. It has never happened. I know this. I know this is shocking to some of you to hear this, but it's only women who can give birth to children. And if you want fewer children, you make war on those who bear them. You make war on women. And that, of course, is what has happened. Now, as many of you will know, I go to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland every year. I'm preparing now to go again. I'll be there next month. The middle of next month is when the annual meeting takes place. Again, the first one, by the way, in the history of the World Economic Forum without Klaus Schwab. And that should be very interesting to observe. But the agenda remains the same. Maybe the longtime ringleader has been removed from the scene, but the agenda remains the same. And in spite of all the many things that the World Economic Forum talks about, and if you go to their website, it lists all kinds of things that seem so touchy and feely that they're so concerned about. Microeconomics in the third world, and assisting people with organic farming, and, deforestation, whatever it might be. Their number one agenda from day one, when they were founded in 1971, is overpopulation. They are obsessed with overpopulation, but they do recognize that doesn't sell particularly well. So they try not to say that quiet part out loud. Occasionally they do. Occasionally, some of them are so arrogant, they do say it out loud. And we have played for you on this show, and perhaps we'll slip it in here again, how Dr. Dennis Meadows, who is an agenda contributor for the World Economic Forum, meaning he's a guy who helps set the agenda, the things that they focus on. And it's his book, Limits to Growth, he co-authored with 3 others, that led to the founding of the World Economic Forum. It had a profound influence on its birth and its development. But Dr. Dennis Meadows has said we need to reduce the global population by about 6 to 7 billion people. And he says we hope we can do it peacefully, nicely. Hope people will off themselves.
But in one way or another, we are so far, globally, we are so far above the population and the consumption levels which can be supported by this planet that I know in one way or another it's going to come back down. So I don't hope to avoid that. I hope that it can occur in a civil way, and I mean civil in a special way. peaceful. Peace doesn't mean that everybody's happy, but it means that conflict isn't solved through violence, through force, but rather in other ways. And so that's what I hope for. That we can, the planet can support something like 1 billion people, maybe 2 billion, depending on how much liberty and how much material consumption you want to have. If you want more liberty and more consumption, you have to have fewer people. And conversely, you can have more people. We could even have 8 or 9 billion probably if we have a very strong dictatorship, which is smart. Unfortunately, you never have smart dictatorships. They're always stupid. But if you had a smart dictatorship and a low standard of living, you can have it. But we want to have freedom and we want to have a high sentence, so we're going to have 1 billion people. And we're now at 7, so we have to get back down. I hope that this can be slow, relatively slow, and that it can be done in a way which is relatively equal, so that people share the experience and you don't have a few rich, trying to force everybody else to deal with it. So those are my hopes. These are pretty pessimistic hopes, but that's what lies ahead.
A steady propaganda campaign, and that's where they went. That's where they started with all of this, is a steady propaganda campaign. And I want to demonstrate to you the way in which it is influenced, probably has influenced you, probably almost everyone. I would say until I really became aware of it, it influenced my own thinking. In uncertain times, wise investors look for stability. Markets are overinflated, inflation remains a concern, and global tensions continue to rise. That's why many are turning to the safety of physical gold and silver. Alpha Omega Gold is a Christian-owned precious metals company known for honesty, transparency, and biblical stewardship principles. Their team help clients protect their investment with integrity and clear guidance, never pressure. Right now, Alpha Omega Gold is offering a free precious metals navigation guide to explain why owning gold and silver can be a smart, strategic hedge for retirement accounts and long-term security. Don't wait until economic shifts impact your future. So today, go and visit www.ao.gold/IHC or call 855-4AO-GOLD. That's 855-426-4653. Call today to learn how simple it can be to secure what matters most. I grew up thinking that, a proper family size was just a couple of kids. That was the responsible thing to do. And this is the messaging of the kind of people that meet at the World Economic Forum each year. And again, as I'd like to point out to you, the World Economic Forum it's fundamentally godless. It is fundamentally godless, and therefore it is fundamentally anti-human. And you say, well, how does godlessness lead to an anti-human spirit? Because if you believe that human beings are a product of random chance and necessity, then if you're consistent in your thinking, you have to arrive at a place where you believe that human beings have no more value than does any other animal on the face of the earth. This is the conclusion of the most consistent atheist I have ever met, a man that we've done 2 debates with, Dr. Peter Singer, he's professor emeritus now at Princeton University, arguably the most influential bioethicist and philosopher of the second half of the 20th century and beyond. He's the father of the animal rights movement. He wrote a book in 1975 called Animal Liberation. And Singer argues this all the time. I've mentioned this on this show before. Singer argues that mothers should get 28 days with a newborn child to determine whether or not they want to keep it or to euthanize it. And to Singer's credit, I will say this, that is at least consistent with an atheistic worldview. And people who seem shocked by that, he points out to them, well, you guys are okay with abortion. You're fine with killing kids before they're born. Why not after? That's where that kind of thinking takes you. You get to a place where you believe there is no divine spark, that human beings are not, which they are in a biblical worldview, the object of special creation, image bearers who bear the image of God and thus set above the rest of the created order. This is the Christian worldview, and it leads to a very different view of human life and dignity and self-worth and hope and meaning. But see, they don't believe that. They don't believe that. And the kind of people who gather at the World Economic Forum, at least the ones who set the agenda, they're Peter Singer types. And guess what? Peter Singer just dawned on me as I'm speaking right now. This Singer is an agenda contributor to the World Economic Forum. So they are quite literally people like Peter Singer, since he is, in fact, one of them. But those earth-worshiping, animal worshiping, it's not exactly accurate to say they're godless. They're atheists concerning the biblical God, the one true God. But they end up creating a kind of neo-paganism, which leads them to earth worship, animal worship. It's kind of stuff you see in the book of Ezekiel. Weird kind of stuff. And you can go on the World Economic Forum website where you'll see some of this. But what these people did is they began a campaign against children by encouraging those who have children, again, women, only women who have children, to do what? What did they encourage them to do? Well, they encouraged them to abandon the home. A steady drip of propaganda about leaving the home and seek fulfillment in careers. How many films, how many TV shows have tried to portray that? Now, more recently, we could probably think of, just a plethora of them. But early on, I think of things like Mary Tyler Moore. That show in the 1960s, early 70s, that show was very influential with younger women and showing them that here's this woman, she lives alone. She's in what is now, like little Somalia in Minneapolis. She's a career woman. She's sexually liberated. She dates whoever she wants to, breaks up with whoever she wants to. She's in no way, bound by a man or by children. And she's responsible and she's moving up the ladder and she's in charge of men in the workplace. This was the picture of the liberated new woman on the left. But it was having influence across the board. I also think of someone like Marlo Thomas, a show that was similar to Mary Tyler Moore, and that's what was the name of that show? That Girl. I seem to remember my mother watching that when I was, a toddler. That show being around, and other kinds of shows like this. You can think of many of them, but that present women in this kind of way. And of course, where that has gone to now, women of that era were still usually presented as quite feminine. Marlo Thomas was a beautiful woman. Mary Tyler Moore, same thing. To now, we get to a place where, of course, women are frequently presented as action heroes, beating up men. I mentioned this, I think, on WTF, an episode of WTF. Lori and I have watched this Apple TV series called Slow Horses. Slow Horses. It's a look at MI5 in Britain, and it tends to be, it goes for more realism. And I got to tell you, the main actor in it, whose name has gone straight out of my head, is brilliant in it. He's just absolutely fantastic in it. But it feels like that show that they wrote the script, they hand it over to the DEI people, who then make several edits and hand it back. And they say, okay, well, this character should be transgender. This character should be a cross-dresser. And this woman here should be beating up a lot of men. And so they have this one woman who looks like she's, 5'4", 110 pounds. She is like a commando unit unto herself. And in fact, in one episode, they have her killing 9 members of the British SAS. Big, brawny, military guys, commandos. And she, without a weapon, comes in on them, manages to she's throwing them around. These are guys who look like they're my size, well over 6 feet, 225 pounds. And she's just throwing them all over the place, breaking necks and all this kind of stuff. And this is where we've gone, is this, when you start in the direction of suppressing femininity and God's design for men and for women, you come to a place where you are eventually annihilating the distinctions between the sexes. And that, of course, is part of the agenda of the left, is to create a kind of unisex where eventually women, and by the way, women are always the losers in this. I want to point this out because I make frequent reference on the show to Romans chapter 1, because Romans chapter 1, if you start reading that regularly, going back, particularly verses 16 through 32, and let that seep into the marrow of your bones, you're going to begin to see its relevance in modern day society, because what the Apostle Paul does in Romans chapter 1, among other things, what he does there is he is giving you the blueprint for what a society looks like when it goes off the rails. And it's because they all follow a similar path. And what does that begin with? He says it begins with the suppression of belief in God. And that moves towards thanklessness. We've just celebrated Thanksgiving. We're in the season of thanks, approaching Christmas. Most of us, I think, are affected by, the holiday cheer. I like to be and listen to lots of Christmas music, and we enjoy that around our house. And we watch a lot of the traditional Christmas movies, lots of them, great ones. And, you got a little more bounce in your step, and you find yourself being a little bit more gentle and generous and forgiving, but you stop being thankful. And thanklessness, he says, leads to this place where society begins this downward spiral, and things get worse and worse and worse. But then he says that the result of it is that societies begin to adopt very unnatural behaviors. Very unnatural behaviors. And this, you can see this pattern in not only in our culture, but if you look back, and this is the importance of the Apostle Paul's blueprint there, as you take it and you play that grid down over, let's say, Greek society, or you lay it down over, predating that, Hebrew society in the Old Testament, or moving forward with the Romans, you can see it followed exactly the same course. And that's the importance of Romans 1, is it's saying, this is the way you not can go, you will go when you suppress the truth of God. Because when you suppress the truth of God, you suppress rationality. And guess who loses out most of all? Women. It's because women are the less powerful physically sex, and the result is usually the annihilation of women. The Greeks did it, the Romans did it. It became so bad in Rome, in fact, that infanticide became a capital crime, because women were making war on their own children for separate purposes, but the same thing. And you see it in Hebrew society, where they're sacrificing their children, burning their children on an altar to Molech. This is the sort of thing that happens. The Greeks, we're told by Herodotus, were often killing the girls, saving the boys, but killing the girls. So this has been done before. This is a movie that we've seen before. But see, it started here in our society. It started here chiefly, and I know there's no real absolute beginning, but it started in the 1960s. And the war on children, I would say, and thus the war on women, really got its start with the publication of a book that I've mentioned here before called The Population Bomb. The population bomb. So women were told, abandon the home, seek fulfillment in careers. Do you know how many people find ultimate fulfillment in careers? Almost none. How many of the times I have spoken in boardrooms of large corporations, law firms, and I'm looking around the room at all of the portraits of the people who have been significant in the life of this corporation over the course of decades. And then I ask somebody in the room, can you tell me who Mr. Smith was here? And you'll get an answer like, he was a partner here. He was one of the founding, partners here. He was senior partner for 10 years. Is that all you can tell me about him? It says he worked here from 1975 until 2015. And virtually nothing about him. I've told my boys, if I've told them once, I've told them 1,000 times, do not make your career is important because how you sustain yourself. And it doesn't mean you can't find some meaning in career. I certainly do. But I know that at the end of it all, and you need to know that at the end of it all, they're going to move on without you. Give you a goodbye, cake, little party. And when you leave with your box of stuff, everybody goes back to their cubicles and the rat race continues without you. Where's your investment elsewhere? Last night I was watching, it's not really a Christmas movie. I hadn't seen it before. But Lori and I like these old films, and I was watching this one I've never seen before. It was Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. And I like to look up, stars, see who they are, what significant things about them. And Katharine Hepburn, what a miserable human being. What a miserable human being. She sacrificed having children to pour everything into her career. And at the end of her life, she's childless. And she writes an autobiography called what? Appropriately, it was called Me. Me. Celebration of herself. An appropriate title for a book because her life had been all about me. It had been all about her. She sacrificed everything on that altar, and no one cares. There's no legacy. Some old movies, pretty well it. Are you investing in shit? But see, women, Katharine Hepburn was held up. And again, I'm talking Katharine Hepburn, not Audrey Hepburn. Her story, I think, is a little bit different. But women were told, this is where you find fulfillment. Get out there, compete with men. Be one of them. Abandon the home. The steady cultural messaging that women who remain at home and focus on their families, they're frustrated, they're oppressed, they're uneducated, they're sexually unfulfilled, desperate housewives. Have you ever heard that before? The desperate housewife, always kind of portrayed as, really having no meaning at all. And they're just kind of kept in pearls and dresses and high heels, by their careerist husbands. But that's hardly a traditional or biblical picture of what it is to be a wife and mother, where real fulfillment can be had. Another part of the messaging was always to convince women that they should seek sexual fulfillment in their quote unquote sexual liberation. That meant abortion. Lots of abortions. That meant no marriage. A more modern version of that is the TV show Friends, where sleeping with someone is like a kiss, like a handshake. Is nothing particularly significant. The Bible calls it essentially, my words, not the Bible's, sex is a spiritual transfusion. Something's happening. Significant. It's a covenant. It's a bond. And hence the reason the Apostle Paul says that, you think you're sleeping with someone, you don't even know her name, and it doesn't really matter. But do you not know that you've become one with that prostitute? So the messaging was to reduce sex to a minor transaction, and to convince women to not marry, or if they did, that it would be much more responsible if they married later. How often have you heard, you need to wait till you finish your degree? You should wait till you get established in your job. You should wait until you have a house. You should wait until you've got some money in the bank. Wait until you make partner in the firm. How did God design women in terms of their most fertile years? It's in their 20s. Their late teens and their 20s. Those are the most fertile childbearing years. And the left's message was, it's too soon. It's one of the reasons why, the primary reason why the fertility drug industry has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it is because women are waiting way too long to try to have children, and often discover that it's too late. A multi-billion-dollar industry. Again, I'm trying to demonstrate to you here how effective the steady drip of propaganda is on this kind of thing. The left wanted to reduce global population, and they wanted to attack the family. And they did. And by the way, some might think that I'm saying here that women are the source of the problem. I am not saying that. I think that this cultural Armageddon that we find ourselves in is chiefly due to the fact that we have weak beta males. The absence of strong men, the absence of men of conviction, the absence of men of courage is a massive cultural crisis. And that has had a very detrimental effect on women who, in many cases, not finding suitable partners, seeks fulfillment somewhere else. So please don't interpret me saying that everything that's gone wrong in society is all the fault of women. That isn't my point. My point is that we as a society as a whole bought into this kind of messaging. Ask yourself this: how many children did your parents or your grandparents have? Mine had 5 on one side and 6 on the other. My wife's family had, I want to say, like 7 on one side and 9 on the other. This was not thought of as strange or unusual. But I will never forget when I was teaching, we had just had our 3rd child, and my employer saying to me, backhandedly, it's cloaked as a joke, but it wasn't one. This was our 3rd child, our 3rd boy. And he says, "Boy, you're breeding like rabbits." You do know how that happens, Larry, don't you? Have you ever heard that? You know how that happens. Like, shouldn't you be using some kind of birth control? Shouldn't your wife be on birth control? Shouldn't you be using a condom? What they didn't say, but sometimes is implied, is maybe an abortion would be in order. More than 2 kids is weird. That's the cultural messaging. More than 2 kids is weird. And it's also a little irresponsible. What is the name of the organization that kills children, that is a factory of death? You know it. Planned Parenthood. All about population. They're admitting it in their name. We're helping you family plan. This is the 3rd child, probably too many. Let's kill it. You're too young to have children. Let's kill it. You're on the career ladder. You're moving up. You're in university. Don't want to have a child now. Get in the way of your success. Let's kill it. Let's plan your parenthood wisely. Let's plan it responsibly. And when you do have children, just bear in mind that you shouldn't have very many. Psalm 127 says that children are a blessing from the Lord. A blessing. Children are not spoken of in Scripture as anything other than a blessing. But the cultural message went in the other direction. A steady drip of this kind of messaging affected all of us, ladies and gentlemen. I got married initially kind of thinking that the responsible thing to do, my parents had 2. My wife's parents had 2. Why the huge change? They come from families of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and even more children. And then all of a sudden, boom, in the 1960s, you begin seeing couples drastically reducing family size. It's because of this messaging. And Christians were influenced by this every bit as much as non-Christians were. There may have been some outliers among some Catholics, but not maybe Mormons, but not many. I don't think Mormonism is Christian, but I've known many nice Mormons, but don't mean to offend you there, but it's a reality. This kind of messaging, marry late. We do have an option over here with Planned Parenthood if you need it. Seek fulfillment in your career. The home, only oppressed women are at home. You poor thing. What's the phrase? Barefoot and pregnant. Women who stayed at home were denigrated, mocked. Look at the TV shows of a bygone era where the family is spoken of and presented in such a positive way. Our culture was pro-family, and then boom, suddenly it wasn't. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, suddenly it wasn't. It was anti-child, it was anti-marriage, it was anti-home, and it presented the liberated woman as fulfilled in every way, shape, and form. All of this is part of a depopulation agenda, among other things. Among other things, you also get more taxpayers, by the way, with women entering into the workforce. But Paul Ehrlich's book, which was a massive bestseller, The Population Bomb, published in 1968, worried everyone. It became an obsession with people. That, oh no, it was Thomas Malthus's argument all over again. Population bomb is Malthusian. And our society in the 1960s and 1970s was obsessed with overpopulation. So that The Predicament of Man was published in 1970, which was influenced by the population bomb. And this was a white paper circulated among a bunch of pointy heads in think tanks, like the Club of Rome, saying that man is in trouble, environmental trouble, largely because of overpopulation. Limits to Growth. Dr. Dennis Meadows, the man that I mentioned earlier, the book that he co-authored, 30 million copies. Again, population is the focus. Not the only thing that's mentioned, but it is a primary focus. 1971, you have the founding of the World Economic Forum, which has population as its centerpiece. 1973, Roe v. Wade, suddenly abortion becomes palatable to many of the American people. We've got to slow down the birth rate. That means killing some kids. Somebody's going to have to take one for the team. How about those who have no voice, who can't complain about it? They don't vote. They can't lobby against us. All of these things are connected. 1974, Henry Kissinger wrote the formerly classified NSSM 200, National Security Study Memo 200. It's now been declassified. You can go read it on the United States government website. It was a memo to then President Nixon, telling him that there needs to be a Planned Parenthood. Again, Roe v. Wade, 1973. 1974 is when this is written to Nixon, telling him we need a global version of Planned Parenthood to reduce the global population. USAID was very instrumental in this as well. Again, USAID, which is supposed to be like a government version, American government version of Samaritan's Purse, they were involved in the depopulation campaign as well. The United States government, through USAID, was doing things like dropping condoms from helicopters, leaflets. Men were encouraged and paid by the United States government in Asia and South America to sterilize themselves. There's some shady history right here. Women being sterilized. Isn't it amazing how when you hear a certain message over and over and over, you become desensitized to it, or worse. And I'm speaking of the negative here. Sometimes hearing a positive message over and over again, it has a positive effect on you. But Scripture also says that bad companies spoil morals, and bad messaging spoils morals when you hear it again and again and again. The depopulation propaganda campaign is one of the most effective propaganda campaigns ever. It has penetrated the thinking of most Westerners who still believe this, that a small family, that's wise, that's responsible. Lori and I, we married very young. In my heavens, we've certainly had our challenges and made our mistakes, but we both decided when we listened to the messaging of the culture, we decided, what? We can be poor separately or we can be poor together. We didn't have hardly anything, hardly 2 wooden nickels to rub together. We lived in the bad part of town in a tiny little, maybe 500 square foot apartment, 1 bedroom. I was jacking up cars and changing tires. She was going to school. We were living separately, and we thought, we could be poor together, or we could be poor apart. Responsibility didn't make much sense in the messaging that we were hearing. Somehow it's more responsible that I don't get married and that we just prolong the relationship, and therefore the relationship probably collapses because you can't sustain it indefinitely. It was time. We recognized that it was time. But kids today are all being told to wait. It's more responsible. Finish college. But even then, that's not enough. Establish your career. Even then, it's not enough. Own a home. Even then, it's not enough. You need to keep waiting, waiting, and waiting. That's the cultural messaging. These kinds of propaganda campaigns are very effective. The one I would put as a close second is the agenda of the sexual agenda. Been very effective in changing the minds of Americans by appealing to freedom and privacy initially. Now they don't want to be private about anything. Now that's gone in a completely different direction. But the steady drip and the propaganda of shows like Will and Grace in the 1990s were incredibly effective in promoting that agenda. Americans began to think of it as, harmless and cute, funny. We are affected by messaging. And I tell you this in part, not simply so that you'll become more aware of this specific campaign, but that you'll be more mindful of the messaging all around you that permeates you every day, like X-rays, that you just kind of mindlessly, well, I started to say mindlessly process, but you don't process at all. They just hit you with it again and again and again, and you begin to think less and less. My generation, the sight of two men kissing was the kind of stuff that would make me nauseous to vomit. I mean, quite literally. To see something like that is just horrifying. But by smuggling it into Netflix and anything that Disney owns and all over television and movies and so on, you gradually start to get used to it. Maybe you fast forward through it, but you become much more, and that's the goal. That's part of the goal, is that you become desensitized to it and you begin to accept it as normal and natural, and it's neither. And that's the way this messaging has worked. So that even in Bible-believing and teaching churches, most people believe this. I was sitting with a couple some months ago who was talking about, in a favorable way, how USAID had promoted family planning in the third world, and that made good sense to them, seemed to be the right thing to do because poor people can't afford children. Have you seen where the Gates Foundation, even in divorce, where Bill and Melinda Gates give their money? Look that up. Have you seen the little video that Bill Gates puts out on population? These people are fundamentally anti-human. They're fundamentally anti-human. But this is the way the propaganda campaigns work. And population explosion, again, 68. The predicament of mankind, limits to growth, Roe v. Wade, NSSM, 200. But you also have in there something that most of you will not have read, but I have mentioned in talking about the World Economic Forum, and that's the first global revolution that was published in 1991. I have it sitting over here by the fireplace. And in it, they speak quite openly of the importance of convincing people of apocalyptic scenarios. And they say, they admit this, we'll talk about how natural disasters can end human life as we know it, life on earth as we know it. We'll talk about floods, and we'll talk about, hunger, and we'll talk about all these things. But then the memo says this. It says the real enemy is humanity itself. Humanity itself. That is the way these people think. That is the way they think. So, in closing, this episode of Ideas Have Consequences, I want to challenge you this week to pay attention and make note of, and please drop them in the comments on our YouTube channel. You can also go over to Twitter and put them there. Maybe some examples that I've not mentioned of TV shows, of movies, of advertisements, lectures, universities, things where you are picking up on the kind of messaging that I'm talking about here. Pay attention. Listen to the commercials and see what you pick up on. And it doesn't have to be just an example of this that we're talking about here, this anti-child. And it is fundamentally an anti-child campaign. But again, the way, if you're really anti-child, you have to attack women. You have to convince women, do not have children. And you have to do it in devious ways. Sometimes they may be your allies and say, I hate children too. I don't want to have kids. But sometimes you just have to convince them this is what they did. It's not responsible. It's weird to have too many of them. You're too poor. You'll be unhappy and unfulfilled. The most fulfilled women I know have been good mothers and have been good wives. And in the biblical model, their children rise up, says Scripture, to call them blessed. I mentioned to you on a previous show, my heavens, what my mother's life would look like right now, having suffered 2 strokes and living with us. And her grandchildren coming to see her, her great-grandchildren. She's now, she's holding little infant great-grandchildren. What would her life look like now if she had decided to follow the model of a Katharine Hepburn? Not good. Institutionalized somewhere where no one cares. And I can tell you they don't. So pay attention to the messaging this week. And it need not be about this specific issue. What are some others that you might be noticing in the culture, the steady drip of propaganda on a specific issue? Right now, you can think a lot of them. The United States is evil, or, it's racist, or any of those kinds of things. Trump is the Antichrist. I saw that recently. But are there others that have been going on for decades? Decades. I think there are. This has been another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton.